Hello again. This time looking at making some tiny hills for use in 10 and 15mm scale. To begin with, I grabbed some foam core and a knife and carved out some bases, beveling the edges as well. Be careful when cutting towards your thumb, and make sure the bony part at the bottom will stop the blade from hitting into the fleshy part. After this, to make some rock faces, I took some styrofoam and scored several fine lines into one side. Then going back in with a sculpting tool, I plucked various sections out so you get a kind of natural rock face. How fine you decide to go with the scoring is ultimately what determines the scale of this piece. Although with rock faces, there's a bit of leeway, so arguably it could work in other scales as well. Using a tinfoil ball, I then pushed a rock texture in, going over the sections that had been plucked out to blend them in. Once happy with the rock faces, I used hot glue to attach them to the base. Now they were attached, I went in with a knife and levelled out the edges so they'd blend in with the rest of the hill. Taking offcuts of foam core and styrofoam and whatever I had on my desk, I trimmed it down to size, then glued it in to form the bulk of the hill, slowly layering up until it was the height of the rock face. I then went in with a knife and smoothed out the edges. To break up the flatness of the rock face, I also took some small cork chunks and glued them in over the edge. This allowed me to blend the two pieces of styrofoam together and break up the flat line at the top. Once those were down, I mixed up a batch of sculptor mould and used it to provide the main body of the hill, blending the various steps together and putting a slight overhang on the front of the stone face. Next up, I made a texture paste of fine sand, black gesso and PVA glue, with a drop or two of water to make it a bit more liquid. Then using an impractically small tool, I applied it over the hills. While that texture base was drying, I took some cork flock and sprinkled it onto the base in front of the stone wall, so you get a bit of detritus at the bottom. For the base coat, I used burnt umber, which I applied somewhat sparingly, so you get a bit of variation with the depth of the brown. Next up, white paint and an old knackered brush to get the rock texture into a nice grey, letting the texture of the stone face do all the work here and basically just pulling out the highlights on it. Then taking a large soft brush and some tan paint, I gave an uneven dry brush over the entire thing, leaving the edge of the piece darker brown and the top of the piece lighter. While that layer dried, I based up some Argatoria minis. Moving to pretty much the final step, I took a folded piece of foam core, taking an old brush with split bristles and some matte Mod Podge, I stippled it around the edge. Taking some winter's grass, which comes out a bit more yellow than you'd expect, I used the static grass applicator to build up various layers, doing it step by step slowly, so you can decide exactly when enough is enough. The advantage of a piece of folded foam core is that you can shake the edge off and bend it up so you have a nice funnel to get the rest of the grass back into the applicator. I aim to put more grass on the edge of the piece, with it being more sparse on top of the hill. And getting decent footage of static grass being put on is not the easiest thing to do, I've discovered. Before the glue had fully dried, I also sprinkled a few bits of foam flock on, and just used my finger to push it in, so you get a nice bit of variation within the foliage, as well as a bit of a colour change as well. As I worked my way towards the top of the hill, I mixed in some dead grass so you get a bit of colour variation within the grass as well, although it's quite a subtle effect. Moving to the top also let me get some decent footage of the grass being static. So you get some nice tendrils rising up from the grass. And we are reaching a stage where I was about happy with the level of grass, so you can still see a lot of the texture from the dirt, but it still appears to be a grassy hill. Taking some darker green clump foliage and a bit of Mod Podge, I also attached that around the base. And that was then done. Some nice Mediterranean style hills. Ready for use in 10 to 15mm scale games, so these would be good for your Hail Caesar Epic or your Argatoria. And if you make them bigger, then you can use them in other games too. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to catch you next time.